Hey guys, it's David from 3D Make It, and today we're going to be talking about Prusa Slicer 2.3.0, some new features, and why you should be using it. Let's go. So Prusa Slicer 2.3.0 is here. It went through lots of betas, it went through the release candidates, and here we are. What's important to us generic users of Prusa Slicer? Well, we get a few new features that are great. We get paint on supports, we get paint on Z-seams, and we also get a new infill pattern called monotonic, which actually smooths the top of your printout amazingly well. You get features that Kira's have, like ironing and other things that have come over to Prusa Slicer 2.3.0, as well as some awesome default profiles, and this is huge. So let's jump in and we'll take a look at a few of these features and just how they affect us. Okay, so when you get Prusa Slicer open, you're greeted with this screen. It's the welcome menu. It's the configuration window. So here we go. So when we get into the wizard here, it'll ask you if you want to remove your old user profiles. This is actually something you should consider doing, but make sure you have a backup. So if you tick this button, it says it will take a backup, which is great. I'll get to why you should consider doing it in a minute. You can come through the wizard. If you actually own a Prusa machine, you can select your Prusa machines in the next two windows, either their filament or their SLA printer. I don't own either, so we're just going to skip it to other vendors. Here, this is one of the big changes that has come to 2.3.0, is we get other brands. So I do have Anycubic and I do have Creality printers. So if we select the brands we have, they pop up in this sub menu underneath here. And when you click next, you're greeted with, well, which printers do you have? I don't have a Cossel, so I don't know why that's checked, which is okay. But I do have a Predator. So there's my Predator. And then I'll click next. Again, Creality, I've got a couple different things. I've got an Ender, I've got a CR10S, so they're all checked in here. So it'll be interesting to note, though, that when you look at the Ender family up here, you do have a Creality Ender 3, and then you do have one with a BL Touch enabled. So they've gone that extra step in these little profiles here. The CR10S, unfortunately, it doesn't have one, so you will have to modify the profile, but we can show you how to do that. That's not hard. So then we click next. We've selected our printers. We click next. If your printer is not in the list, no worries. They still have the custom printer section. You can use the define custom printer and then name it, and then underneath it will give you all of the configurations options to do what kind of firmware it's running, how big is it, and the acceleration settings and the temperature settings. But once you get all of this done, so once you get through here, we'll click next and filaments. So you can see here, here's a list of filaments that get attached to the printers. So it's a sticky menu. So if you click the Predator, you can see that my Predator will use generic stuff. That's what it's set up for right out of the box, is generic. So that's fine. The next one that we see is my CR10S, and the CR10S actually uses a few more filaments, and there's more brands. So there's some of the brand profiles are a little more complete at this moment, but the printing profiles all do work well. And really the generic PLA is just great if you're printing PLA on the Predator, or if you're printing even PETG PLA on your Creality series. So we click next, the check updates you can leave. I like to look for them automatically. This one's cool. If they add new presets, it will come down to you. So it's a good option to have both of those checks. The next, and then you can do export full path names. I don't really do that. I leave that unchecked. It's up to you. But next, you can associate files to Prusa Slicer. So that means when you're in Windows and you double click your STL you just downloaded, it's going to open up automatically in Prusa. So all options for you. None of them, once you get past the printers, are mandatory to have. So you can click finish. Nothing much has changed here. We have the same windows. We do see nicer bed models now. Instead of the generic grid, you get the Ender platform and that kind of stuff. On the right hand side of the screen here, I suggest that you pick expert mode just to show all the hidden settings that you might want to use. You have three different sections: print, filament, and printer. just like Prusa Slicer 3.0. And if you go into the settings, or you can use the tabs to navigate through them up top here. Same thing as using the setting gears on the side here. It'll just bring you to the preset. You can actually go through, add new printers. So if you hit the settings gear here, you can add new printers and do everything from here. Or you can pop back into the configuration wizard, which is sweet. You can go back to the beginning to add new printers. So there's not a lot we're going to touch on in these sections right now. Just know that your profiles end up here. And then you can add new printers or remove printers. So if we look at my drop-down menu, we can see that I have a users preset section and my physical printers preset section. And this is something that Prusa 2.3.0 handles differently. Usually those user preset ones want to be physical printers. Physical printers have things like Octoprint servers attached to them, but when you click them, the profile looks really similar. So here, let's pick our CR10S down here. We can see, you know, the general screen has our settings for it. If I go up here for my CR10S user preset, not the system preset, we can see it looks the same, like nothing's changed. So what it's doing is it's attaching those user presets to the physical printer presets. The real winner of Prusa 2.3.0, and this is why I would suggest maybe choosing that remove user profile button, is these profiles work fantastically. So just like Kira did in Kira 4.1 with the Creality printers and merging the Cruawesome mod, and we did a video on that if you want to go check that out, but this is a Prusa video. So Prusa Slicer has added all of those printers in for us, and their profiles are fantastic. I've done a bunch of test prints on modded printers that I've been working on with Prusa Slicer 2.3, and man, do those prints come out great. Let's show you a few right now. So I guess the use case for the user preference printers is going to be just that. If you have a preference that's not in the stock profile, then that would be when you use the stock profile, edit it, and save it as a new one. So for example, when we were talking about the CR10S not having the start G code for the auto bed leveler, the BL Touch, it didn't have it. So we could add that in, save it as a user-based profile, and then use that going forward, which would pull all of the settings from the Prusa one. And the sweet part is when you use the Prusa ones to make your profile, they actually get linked. So when you come into Prusa here, let's pick one of our profiles up top. So we're going to be using, let's say the CR10, like from our example. We go CR10S, and I want to show you this dependencies, and you don't really need to play with it too much, but you can see here that this profile is dependent on a system profile. This one, it's pulling in all of the model or all of the profile information that we need for this model of printer. So when we were to change this, so let's just do it. Let's go custom G code. We know that we wanted to add a BL Touch, so we're going to add a G29, and then we're just going to call that ABL. Now I'm going to hit save. You can't save to a system profile, so automatically you have to make a new one. So if I make a new one, and then I'm going to call this BL Touch, just like that. And then we're going to click OK. Once we made that new printer, it's saved. There's no modified. There's nothing beside it, so we don't need to worry about hitting the save button. But let's click dependencies. Look, it brought those dependencies with us. So now it knows that, hey, this model of printer uses the default profile from Prusa Slicer, but we've added something. So now going forward, you're always going to get the new, better changes in those profiles that Prusa is building, but you get to use your modded G code or custom printer settings. All right, let's bring a model in. So there's a few ways to bring models in, and we talked about them before. You can click and drag, you can go File, Import, STL, or you can use the little Add button here, or simply drag and drop your STLs into Prusa Slicer. I use the little box. Here's my STL folder that I want to deal with today. And you can see I've got a few in there. I'm going to bring them all in. Now, once they all get loaded, they are definitely not in place. In fact, some of them aren't even orientated properly. The first thing we do though is we check to see if we need repairing. We do have one that needs repair, so let's repair it. I'm just going to hit the explanation point in the triangle. It will open up. It'll go repairing with NetFab. And in a few seconds, that model will be repaired and we'll be good to go. So the model itself is repaired. Check that out. All done. Easy, simple. All disappears. So right now, I just want to deal with one model, even though I brought a few in. So I'm going to hide this one. I'm going to hide this one. And I'm going to hide this one. So let's start with our John Wick. So once you hide them, if you hit A, it will disappear them from the plate. So that's the A key, or the arrange all. And that's up here, the arrange all. So you can see here's our little John Wick, and we've printed him and shown him before. So if we just slice them, let's slice them right now. So we're using that CR10S. We're using we can use let's use the optimal profile, and let's use the Prusa Mint PLA. Slice now. So while our John Wick is slicing, we're going to notice a few things, like we lose the screen, but it does come back a little faster than when it's finished slicing. But we can grab our John Wick and we can see here that it's going to print a skirt. But what I really want to see is where we need some support. This guy's little. He might need a little support with life. So we have his little feet. So right away, I can tell that the pencil doesn't print. So let's pop back here. So see, this pencil tip is above the print bed. So we might want to actually support the whole shaft going down. So that's one area. And then we can look at the model too. And I noticed that the hand is probably going to need a little. Underneath in his crotch area is going to need a little. And then this hair back here will need a little. And we've printed him before. We use this model as an example of Prusa Slicer 2.2, how great the supports were. But let's click them. We're going to click this paintbrush. And this is one of the new features, the paint on supports. So you can change your brush size here. I like 2, but if it's too big, we can go down. The bigger you have it, the more area you can select. So I would just probably say start with 2 and then work your way up and down, but you can figure that out as you're going. So if you right click your model, it will add support. So we can go back to our preview briefly and we can see that this pencil, let's just bring up our preview. And this pencil, we should probably support right here. Okay, so let's find that, and that's right here. So you can see that I've got this kind of circle. That's my paintbrush for my support. And if I hover right below, it's turning everything blue. So see how that turned blue? If I right click, it turns blue, or sorry, if I left click, it turns blue. If I right click, it turns red. And what that means is red is taking away support, blue is adding support. If you hate what you've done, you can always go back and undo it. But so now we've got a little bit of support on our tip. It's good to note that if you support above your model, so like if you click up here, and oops, obviously it won't generate support up there. So let's just slice it and see how we made out with that pencil. And then we can move on to his hand and then get a good print going. So the one thing you'll note here is, hey, I got no support. That's because we have to actually go here and do for an enforcer. So supports and support enforcers, let it adjust these settings. It'll change the bridge detection, which is fine. Just let it adjust that for you. And then again, we'll just slice it and we'll open it up and we should be ducky. So we can see here that there is a little bit of support generated, like the world's smallest D amount on the pencil. So right there, it'll support it enough to get that overhang going, and then that's it. So your support enforcers follow your model support rules. And you can see here on the top of his head, didn't do anything. So we put that little blip up there just to test, and it didn't do anything. So the next part is his hand over here. So let's paint his hand. So we'll just go boop, and we'll get his little fingers in there, and we're painting his hand. So the paint is kind of a sticky search. It will paint other parts of the model if you're going a little overboard. So I'm just going to paint under here. Yeah, that's good. So let's hit slice and see what happens. So you can see here right off the bat, it needed more support obviously for the hand because it's taller. So it generated my support wall and up it goes. The only other place we were talking about is under the crotch and behind the head. So we'll just paint a section there because we can still use bridging, right? We don't need to support everything. So let's just get under his hair here and we'll make sure we get the points because those little points are going to be hard. And I know from past experience that the material does come off okay. So we'll just hit slice once we get all that painted. And that's the first newish feature that we'll talk about is the paint on supports. So once we're happy with this, this is a CR10S build. We'll hit export and I'm going to save it in my STL folder there. And we're going to print it. We're going to print it and probably show it off on one of the live streams. So let's jump to the next section. Okay, so John Wick, you've been good. We appreciate your time and service, but it's time for you to get the eyeglass and leave. So we're going to hide them. And then actually what we're going to do is bring this box in. And then we're going to hit A on the keyboard, or you can use the auto arrange button. So the box came back. I'm just going to rotate it flat down. So again, that's this guy. That's not a new feature. Place on face has been here a while. So now it's on the face. It doesn't really matter. It's a box. It can print any way it wants. I'm just going to rotate it just because. So remember the rotation ring, if you use the inside circle, it snaps to those lines on the inside for quick. If you stay on the outside of the circle, it's like a fine adjustment. So that's just a tip. It's not a new feature. So we have our box and you say, yeah, great. We have a box. This box is easy. There's no support needed. There's, it prints without support. The angles are as such that the printer can handle the inclines. Now this box is designed for the Ender 3. And what it does is it houses E3, E3 dip, E3 turbo board. That's what the or the stock board. You can put the stock board in it, and it goes behind the printer. And we'll have a video on this and more coming up. One thing that it does do is it slides between the gantry. So if we let Z-seam work automatically, it might try, and I know this for a fact, to align it to an edge, which actually is really not that good for this model because we want it to fit in nicely. So lessons learned, I print this. Let's use another new feature, and that feature is this one, seam painting. So you can get there by pressing P or just clicking the box. Similar to the other one, so similar to our paint on supports, we have a brush size, so we can just leave that, that's fine. But I want to make sure that my Z-seam actually comes up on the front. This slides into the printer in this orientation, so it slides back into the printer. So I want to make sure that there's no seams to block it along the extrusion. So I'm just going to click and I'm dragging straight up. So right off the bat, I can hear you saying at the screen, hey, that's going to make a line going straight up on the model. And you are right. So if you're printing something and you want to hide the seam, you're going to go for a corner. So the corner would be a better choice, but in my case, I don't want the corners to bulge. I need this to fit, and I know this is the open face. So what happens when I hit slice? So let's find out. Let's slice it. Probably wouldn't print it at 0.16. I would go higher, but that's okay. That's okay. So you can see that white line. The seam is right there, and it kind of, because my mouse, remember, I didn't draw a straight line. I kind of curved by accident. So that's where it is. So now that's where the bulge on the model is going to be from the seam. And I don't need to do a lot of post-processing. If you are post-processing, putting it in one line is easier to sand it off than have it like dotting all over. So this is a great feature. I really like the paint on supports. And last but not least, I mentioned that there's a monotonic infill pattern for the top. This actually makes it super smooth on the top. So let's turf box. So we're going to hide box. We're going to bring CaliCat in. Again, we're pushing A, and that will bring CaliCat back. I'm going to scale CaliCat up a bit. So we'll just grab it, bring it up, make it big. Yeah, that's pretty good. There, perfect. So now if we use our CaliCat and we go into print settings and we'll go into infill. we can see here in our infill that monotonic is already selected. It's the top fill pattern and the bottom fill pattern. So before we had grid, we had lines. It was okay. It always kind of looked funny in some models, especially the flatter they got on the top. So now that it's monotonic, let's just slice it and then we'll look at the top. I'll just let it finish here. Again, it shows up, shows the preview before the model is actually done. But you can see here, like, look, that red line is fairly flat on the top. Let's just scroll down a bit, up a bit. There we go. So it's fairly matte. Okay, so now let's go back to print settings. We're going to change it from monotonic and let's do rectilinear. Why not? And we're going to go platter and let's slice. So already you can kind of see like a change in the model. There's a wave in the video card, the way it displays. And if you zoom in more and more and more, you can see that the lines are actually going in a pattern. And if you zoom out, you can see that checkerboard. So that monotonic infill, and that's what I've been using. So all the models that will show off from the earlier part of the video will have that monotonic. It's nice and flat. So those are 3 great new features in Prusa 2.3.0 in the slicer, including the new profiles. Is it worth the switch to Prusa Slicer 2.3.0? Well, before we made a video called Kira's Dad Used Prusa, something along that line. And I got to say, yeah, Kira is going to have to outperform some of the features, not all of them, but some of the features Prusa has to make me switch back for my daily driver. So both Greg and I use Prusa Slicer 2.3.0 now, and we love it. Kira 4.8 has a place in my heart. That was the first slicer I used was Kira, and I learned it very, very well. And it does have some great features. Again, tree support hasn't come to Prusa Slicer 2.3.0. And actually, Kira started using some of Prusa's library in its last rendition. So the 2 slicers are actually kind of getting closer together. Right now, I got to say the Prusa profiles for the printer, especially if you're using one of those main printer brands that were in the Wizard, they're great. They work perfect. Some of the Kira ones, you still got to tweak a little here and there. But again, Prusa 2.3.0, it's come a long way and it's a great slicer. And even if you love Kira, I'm not saying switch, but I am saying Prusa 2.3.0 is worth your time. So once again, hey, thanks for tuning in, checking out, sticking with us. If you made it this far, you're awesome. Remember, hit that subscribe button, like, and share these videos around. We want to grow our community more in 2021 here, and you guys are a big part of that for us. And thank you for all that you do and for coming along these journeys. Until next time, have a good one.